Everyone's attention. This is a committee of the whole, and I'm excited about the work that's being done here. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I want all of you to know you have our full support. All of us in this room have unique journeys and different stories about how we got to Gallaudet. It's wonderful to see the leaders embracing this work. You're embracing English and ASL, not one or the other, right? We're breaking new ground, uncharted territory, so just please know that you have the full board's support.
Okay, so Seth, do you mind if we ask the board members to please stand? Many in the audience may not know who board members are because they're scattered throughout the audience.
Sure, if the board members could please stand.
Great. So first, I'd like to recognize Seth Braden. I don't know if you're aware, but in October he became chair of the Board of Trustees, so I want to thank Seth for stepping up into this role. The vice chair is Claire Bugan. Claire, are you here? And if so, can you stand? Okay, there she is. Other officers include our treasurer and
Jeff Humber.
Jeff Humber, and then also Dwayne Halliburton, who is a member of the executive team. So we do have an executive team of the board that includes Seth, Greg, Dwayne, Jeff Humber. I don't know if Jeff's here this morning with us. Apparently, maybe not. We had a very late evening last night, so that's the makeup of the executive team. And as president, I don't often have an audience to have this kind of opportunity to have this kind of audience to thank the Board of Trustees. They come to our campus for 3 full days, and I rarely see a group of people who work as hard as they do for 3 straight days. This is our board. They work diligently and hard, and I know from my experience over for the next 3 days, they're going to be exhausted, and they have to go back to their families and jobs and everything else. Remember, this is a voluntary commitment that they've made. So on behalf of Gallaudet University, this is an opportunity here to thank you for your commitment and all the hard work that you do on behalf of Gallaudet University. And so, Seth has introduced this session. This is a committee of the whole for the board. It's important that Gallaudet understand this is an open meeting that's being held this morning. We've invited members of the community to listen into this presentation. And we didn't anticipate we would have sufficient room over in the hotel where we typically meet, and that's why we've moved locations to here. So I guess we can see by the looks of the audience, the community has shown up to watch this presentation, and so that decision was a good one. So there's lots of information that will be shared, and I think one of the most important things those of you who are here can share with others who are not here is that this task force will give this presentation once again in the upcoming future to the Gallaudet community and for others who can then all appreciate the work that they've done. I did want to share some words of support for the presentation you're about to see. We have for a number of years, I think in fact one of the earliest documents was back in 1983, sometime in the 80s, been on a journey to understand what it means to be a bilingual university. And this team has done their worst at work on investigating and really understanding that this journey has been a long one. In fact, ever since the establishment of Gallaudet, we've been talking about what it means to be bilingual. Back when we were founded, it was called Teaching in a Manual Language and English. That's how it was referred to back then. And 59 years ago, there was a revolution where that manual language was recognized as being not just English on the hands, but in fact a true and valid language. And that discovery was remarkable. In just 59 short years, we have been creating a revolution of sorts. It's truly a revolution when it comes to research and teaching and the way we use it socially and on our occupations to truly understand what it means to be bilingual. So, what today is and what it's not is something I'd like to speak to. So what today is an attempt to give our community an opportunity to understand a framework. Now there's a sign that we've developed that represents the notion of framework, and you'll understand more about that as we go through the presentation, but to understand the assumptions, some of them innate that come with this, the principles and the values that really guide our community in this work that we're doing to discover what it means to be bilingual. Today is a calling. It's a call for us to become much more intentional in our understanding of what it means to be bilingual. And so I call each of you to that work to deepen our understanding together. And it's a call for us to give attention to something that we already know and we already do on a daily basis. It's in our bilingual mission. It's in our mission that we are bilingual. But I think the difficult challenge is to describe that word. And I want to give two examples to you. One example is I've made a number of vlogs over the course of my presidency, and I'm sure you've seen some of them. Many people have shared comments that they've seen me shift from when I first became president and I was signing much more in English word order. I was watching the teleprompter and trying to follow the teleprompting, and you know the pressure of watching in English, and you probably saw that on my face and in my delivery at that time. That was the beginnings to where I am now, signing much more comfortably in that process. And you might wonder what shifted that. We went from using the teleprompter and recognizing that it was not working and insufficient, and we brought in then a CDI. The CDI would work with me to adjust my delivery in various ways and help me really break form the English form. And as I chatted with the CDI, I recognized that while her title is a certified deaf interpreter, I recognize that she's not playing that role when she's working with me in this capacity. She's really being an ASL editor. You know, we don't have a job description for any ASL editors here at Gallaudet. Now, we have communications and job descriptions saying you have to edit English to make sure the English is in perfected form as it goes out from the president's office. So we certainly have that perfected form of the English editing, but where's the counterpart for ASL editing to happen? Well, that's something I'm working on, let me tell you that. Another example, when this task force came together, and again, you're going to see the first inaugural showing of what this framework represents. I have to tell you, it is absolutely exciting. And I want us each to have the experience of watching it, as you'll see varying reactions to that. I know we've watched it once in a small group and experienced that. And what showed up as we watched this and evaluated and tried to understand the potential impact that this video may have on you was a new understanding, a realization of sorts. That when the president of Gallaudet University issues an official statement to the community, when it's written in English, in that form, we worry about the content of that official statement, right? We want to make sure it's worded correctly. And when it's shared with the community broadly, you read it and understand the content. And you really may ask, where is the ASL counterpart to that? And of course, the report that's been given to the community recently is the commitment of accessibility is that we will provide content in both ASL and English. But what's interesting, through this experience of the task force, we've come to realize some novel ideas, and that is that Gallaudet has yet to establish what it means to have an official statement produced in ASL. Because we're bound to the paper where there's no person to deliver that message. And that could really apply to any person, as any person might be reading it. But when you see it delivered in ASL, the messenger is part of the message and it cannot be separated. So we want to make sure that we represent the community when you see the ASL statements being delivered, that you'll see a number of different people as the messenger of those statements. So the question is, how do we make an official statement in ASL and address at the same time our community's need to see ourselves reflected in that statement through the representation of the messenger? And that represents, of course, through the messenger, the diversity of our community. That was just an amazing realization. These are the kinds of questions that we're dealing with. These are areas that we want to be doing intentional learning together as a community. And it's just the beginning of our journey together. So let this experience be an opportunity for us to grow together and not to become contentious. If you feel any kind of tension, I ask that you hold that and really question as to where that tension's coming from, because that's what we have to pay attention to. When those emotions surface, what is it that we need to unpack and work through together? And that's the calling I have for you as president of Gallaudet. On behalf of all of us, and especially this task force that's worked for 2 years to produce this opportunity to have this conversation with you, I turn it over to them.
Thank you. Fantastic. You expressed so much of what we have experienced these past 2 years, so thank you, President Cordano. It is my honor to be here with all of you. I'd like to start by sharing a personal story of mine. And President Cordano alluded to this, and before I get into that story, I'd like to just share that the task force is building a bridge, and we are currently walking on that bridge. It's very new, it's challenging, we're facing new concepts, and thank you for walking on this bridge with us. So we're on the way to building that bridge. It's not quite completed, and we will complete it together. In 1984, I taught my first class, and I inquired about how I would communicate in this class. I was told to SimCom, and I do not speak well. It was a graduate class, a mix of hearing and deaf students, and I was told to use my voice and to sign. So I did both. I did not feel very comfortable at all. I did this for 2 years, much to my chagrin, and then decided I would just go ahead and use ASL and use written English. And this was unintentional bilingualism. There was no technology, no instruction on how I could make my classroom bilingual. I just did this unintentional. So until 2 years ago, I hadn't had this discussion. For 33 years I've been teaching. And not until 2 years ago, when I joined this task force and joined this fantastic league of people, did we have this formal discussion. And it is transformative. So we've been looking at what does bilingualism look like in the classroom and at the university. And we now have a framework to guide us. And this effort really has us aligning our bilingual mission with our values of the university and the practices that we use here. The task force wants to thank President Bobby. Thank you so much. Chief of Staff Heather Harker, Provost Erding, thank you so much for your support in this journey and for working with us alongside of us. Our goal for today is to accomplish 5 things. We would like for you to leave with the understanding of how bilingualism happens here at the university, with an understanding of how we got to this point where we are today, what the intention of bilingualism is and why it is so crucial to our Gallaudet University community. Fourth, to recognize that it is a very complex and challenging issue and task to tackle. And fifth, to reflect on the importance of this new framework and supporting the intentional bilingualism here at the university. So at the end, we will show you a video. And we will also share recommendations to the board, and then we'll open the floor up for questions and answers. And I ask that if you think of any questions, please do hold those to the end when we will open the floor to you all. So I'd like to begin with Dr. Laureen Sims. She will give you just a glimpse into the history of American Sign Language and English bilingualism. Laureen?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I just have to say, looking back to the very beginnings of bilingualism, to where we are today, and that journey when I was a teacher to where I am now being a professor of over 30 years, it's amazing, and I'd like to share with you some of that history and how is it that bilingualism has got us to where we are. I do want to share my experience in this journey, and in doing so, I want to recognize that this is Black History Month. And that's very meaningful. And at the same time, it's not a month, it's a full year of recognition of Black history. So paying homage to that first, now let me go ahead and begin. As I look back, it feels as though it was just yesterday, but in fact it was 30 years ago that there's been a powerful movement that struck our community. And of course, we're all aware of the history related to the Deaf President Now movement. That's very familiar to all of us, as well as the impact. It was our selection of the first deaf president. Not only did that have an impact here at Gallaudet, but the ripple effect impacted many different disciplines and fields of studies, organizations, services, associations, and agencies, and had a significant impact for me personally in a school setting. In the educational setting that I was in, we as a group were dissatisfied with the role of deaf education and feeling that there was a failure in deaf education. Information that we'd received up to date had led us to understand that something needed to be done to improve the situations in schools. In 1988, with this monumental movement that happened, there was something that happened the following year that was of significant impact. Marie Philip is a key individual whom many of us look to as a role model. She is considered to be a very brave pioneer who moved forward to establish what we call the bilingual, bicultural, bi program in an educational setting. It was her notion that it was important to bring ASL into the classroom. Certainly English had been present in the classroom through SimCom, as Jeff has just explained to you. And we'd experienced growing up, learning in environments where English was prevalent, but Marie Phillips asked us to take a moment to think about how ASL could be a part of that classroom environment. Many, many questions were raised and issues as a result. Concerns about spoken English were raised, issues over what we would do with hard of hearing students or students with cochlear implants. The issues were very broad and widespread. The reaction to this notion of bringing ASL into the classroom was very strong. Then in 1990, and I'll refer here to the slide, I don't know if you know where I am in this picture. Any guesses? Some of you are guessing. I'm there in the middle, pretty easy to find me. That's the pre-bald era, if you will, as you see me in that picture where my hair was a bit longer. In 1990, I happened to be in the midst of a school-wide reform that was happening, a movement that was taking place that I was witnessing firsthand. There was a lot of high risk involved, strong emotions ran the gamut. We were experiencing oppression and saw it firsthand. We experienced challenges and frustrations in this transformation. And in this, we recognized the importance of having bilingualism in the classroom and adding ASL to the instruction, but the response was counter to that. Many people did not believe there was a place for ASL in the classroom. There were strong reactions to it. And I refer to this period of time and those feelings as language fear. As I look back, I completely understand where that fear was coming from. It was coming from American Sign Language. For those of us who worked and prepared and discussed within this context, we had yet to really study ASL formally. We, in fact, had never taken a formal ASL class. All of our educational experience had been such that we never took an ASL class. For all of you who are gathered in this room, I bet there's many of you as well who've never taken an ASL class during your educational environment in your school classrooms. So the less you know about the language, the more misunderstandings there are, the more questions and oppression that can exist. We learn it by default. Now, all of us, of course, have studied English forever. We've grown up all of our lives as English being predominantly taught in the classroom. And because this was the situation at the time, many questions about ASL were coming to the surface. So I know you've seen MSSD. You've just come back from MSSD. The board have an opportunity to tour MSSD. I'm sure you're quite impressed with what you've seen. Now, I have to remind you, this is 2019. And there are very few schools in our nation who are using a bilingual approach to education. Very few. But let me back up. Back to the notion of language fear. We as deaf people know inherently that signing is important. We know ASL is important. We live and breathe it. That's what we do. That's how we operate. That's a part of the journey and my journey for the last 30 years. And yet language fear has led us and continue to lead us to where we are today. So that's the first important point. Secondly, as a person of color, there's been much discussion within my community questioning ASL and a bilingual framework as to how it can fit our community. Now, this is not true for all people of color, but many professionals have engaged in conversations about language, and we've had a sense that ASL in English in a bilingual form is within the domain of white people. It belongs to white people. And ASL is considered often to be a very white-dominant language. The people who present in American Sign Language and books that have been written about it and articles have been done so by people who are white. At least during my time, there were not many people of color who really were a part of that effort. It was primarily led by deaf white people. The question always comes back to, what about English? Well, English, if you think about it, is often white too. We think about English in the domain of whiteness, used by white people, by people who are predominantly white-skinned or lighter-skinned. And so it's a logic issue for me that creates a conflict when we look to Martin Luther King, for example, as a role model. Martin Luther King Jr., who gave his infamous speech, "I Have a Dream," that rocked the world and inspired so many people. In his delivery of that speech, he used white English. President Obama, in his speeches as well, used what I refer to as white English. So that's a logic issue. ASL as well is often seen as white ASL. So often when we talk about the language, it's embedded within our own feelings of how that language is presented and the information that is shared through the delivery of that message. Through our conversations, we understand the issue has to be decoupled. We have English and ASL bilingualism and multiculturalism. Both of them have been separated, and many people have misunderstood and coupled them together. Me, as a person of color, feels that it's impossible to continue to keep these domains separate. We have to bring together multiculturalism with bilingualism, because for me, ASL and English, that part of me is inextricably bound with the multicultural part of me as well. We cannot separate the two because they form one. And so when we engage in conversations about ASL, or you talk about multiculturalism, we do so using ASL. We articulate our concepts, as I'm doing now with you, through the use of sign language, through American Sign Language. Without that, I'm not explaining what I mean. We look to printed form of English to also share those concepts. So they're infused with one another. Even math, we see the infusion of bilingualism and multiculturalism. Psychology and business, we see it true in many disciplines and businesses as well. The audiology department, the psychology department, here at the university in many different capacities, we see this binding together, the infusion of multiculturalism and bilingualism. They're not separate issues to always remain isolated from one another, because it's impossible to function in that way. We must tie them together, infuse them together, so that we create an integrated approach, where we understand all the ingredients that are necessary to create what we want in this community. For multiculturalism, we need ingredients that provide us with a deaf lens, a multicultural experience, the experience of Black deaf people and what it means to be a Black Latino person, a Black bilingual person, a deaf person who is of different sexual orientations. So all of these lenses have to be a part of our conversations, and we can have significant training in multiculturalism, and mind you, I love to go to those kinds of trainings. I've attended many over the years, and I very much enjoy that. But where is the deaf lens in multiculturalism? How is that lens applied? And we've certainly seen a lack of that happening even here at Gallaudet University. If I think to the classes where I have a variety of students from differing communication backgrounds, and the materials that I teach them about multiculturalism, is something that they can each apply to their personal experience. And that's a challenge for me to infuse these topics. It's impossible for us to decouple them. We have to continually see how we can put the ingredients together of multiculturalism, the resources, the training, and the support, and the same thing is true for bilingualism. We see to the president's office how it's been infused, where she, as the president, has been able to use different ingredients in both of these lenses to create the vlogs and all that she's done. The board is doing the same thing. So bringing together these two very important realms is critical. Schools are often calling upon me to provide some advice related to social justice and work in that area. I've worked at 4 different schools of recent, training individuals in social justice in these schools. And often when I've asked to come to these schools to provide social justice training, it's these schools who have very much infused this notion of multiculturalism and bilingualism. They have what you might call a cookbook, where they have wonderful ingredients. They see a deaf president, a deaf principal or superintendent, a deaf principal. They have hearing staff members, deaf staff members. They have a wonderful individuals who are there who sign. They have academic bowls that are championship winners over the years. So they're doing all of the right things, and yet they have not yet addressed the issue of bilingualism. I really believe that's because there's an underlying current that has not been given the attention it needs. It needs to be a part of who we are, our beliefs as it pertains to ASL, our beliefs as it pertains to individuals of different race, the racism that we have to unpack for ourselves, the autism that we each hold within ourselves has to be unpacked. When I think to my 30-year experience and the journey that's led me here today, I see that I'm still in the process of unpacking those underlying issues. I call that my ouch process, if you will, that process of discovering those very difficult, uncomfortable things that we all hold within the core of who we are. And when we are able to unpack that, we can at the same time bring that into that sphere of multiculturalism and bilingualism. And I'm going to give the interpreter a moment time to catch up. I often work with interpreters. It seems like we're doing fine on that front. So it's important that we look to those underlying fears and biases. We use the analogy of a cookbook, and that's the how-to part of it, where we put together ideas of multiculturalism and bilingualism that address the how-to in the cookbook. But it's the underlying issues of fear that we have to get to. The other thing we need to talk about is allyship. We don't have enough discussion about what that is and how do we act as allies. What's the role of hearing people in that capacity? The privilege and the power that they hold can be used in such a way to bolster us. In my 30-year journey, looking to those individuals in this picture, they are my dear colleagues. They have fought alongside of me in support of these issues. And when we went through this all of our life, the frustration, we understood the system that had to be navigated around and through, and allies came with us to make that happen. We're not just talking about Black and deaf allies, we're talking about people of color who can pull alongside as allies. MJ, coming from the South in Louisiana, the deep South, if you will, being a very predominantly white person, fought diligently to make sure we could have 2 Black teachers a part of the ASL and Deaf Studies department. That's a perfect example of allyship, and a tremendous one. She recognized the inherent racism that we each have and how we have to fight to navigate that system to make change happen. Rarely do we see the hiring of 2 Black individuals at the same time. You might find 1, but to have 2 individuals hired, that shows progress. So all of these things have been happening where we have to address these underlying issues and to make sure they're a part of everything we do, to blend them into the ingredients of our cookbook so that we infuse bilingualism, multiculturalism, and at the same time recognizing those deep-seated beliefs and values that we all hold. Bringing me 30 years from where I was in a school to a university professor where I am now. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to MJ, who will also share some remarks, giving the history of where we have gotten to where we are. Everyone has a personal story to share, as do I. Obviously, I have a personal story that I have been through what's led me to where I am, growing up at a school for the deaf where we were required to finger spell. We had no choice but to finger spell. I wish the interpreter best of luck as I'm finger spelling every single letter of the words that I just said. But that was my experience. I had a deaf family, so we communicated in ASL at home, and I went back and forth between the school, really understanding both English and American Sign Language. I never understood what it meant to be bilingual. I didn't have a label for it. It was just kind of an innate thing. When I was talking with my friends, I would do that. I majored in English, where I would use English. I got my bachelor's degree in English. I used ASL as well, very fluently. I graduated, I got a job, and always in the back of my mind, this notion of bilingualism has always existed. Lorene has talked about her experiences as she looks back. I look to the time of the Learning Center in Massachusetts and working in Indiana and all that both of those schools have gone through and the tremendous transformation. But that's not my story. My story begins here at Gallaudet University. Gallaudet is my home away from home. This is where my heart always has been. And the reason why I care so much about bilingualism is because I care so much about Gallaudet. So I want to give you a history of how it is we got to the university mission that we currently have on the books. Back in 2007, Middle States Commission on Higher Education, MSCHE, our accrediting body for the university, reviewed Gallaudet's materials and put Gallaudet on probation. This was a wake-up call for Gallaudet. We were close to losing our accreditation and knew that's something we couldn't allow to happen. President Davila was president at that time, and he established in response various work groups. And of those work groups, one of them was the university mission. Middle States said that we really have not defined who we are based on our mission. There was a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty as to what Gallaudet is and who we are. So Dr. Davila appointed Simon Guteng from the Department of Education and myself from the Department of ASL and Deaf Studies to co-chair that group. We came together as a committee and selected a variety of different members. I think we had 20 to 22 members that served on our work group. And they came from various backgrounds. Some were faculty and staff. At that time, I realized we didn't include students, but we did have faculty and staff on the work group representing different departments, including psychology, education, PER, deaf studies, foreign languages, English, hearing and speech and language sciences. A variety of different departments were represented in our work group. And we came together and did lots of investigations and research of what were happening at other bilingual universities, looking to see how we could use different language to represent what it is we were doing. And through a lot of work and lots of discussions, we came together with what we felt was a very good representation of our mission, which we all agreed on. All of us, all 22 of us, gave the nod that this was exactly what we wanted. It was unanimous that we agreed that this was to be the mission. So we began our work in February, and the mission was due to be delivered in July. You can imagine the speed at which we had to work. In July, the executive committee of the board came together, and we had a session for them to review the mission, and it was at that point in time that they approved that mission. So I'd like to show you that mission statement now, which continues to be our mission statement. In our investigation, we looked to the EDA, the Education of the Deaf Act, to make sure we were not in conflict in any way, that we were complying with all the laws and legal statutes. Some of the significant words that I wanted to point out here is bilingual, ensuring the intellectual and professional advancement of deaf and hard of hearing students. So we mentioned both deaf and hard of hearing, and then also through American Sign Language and English as mentioned here. So that was in 2007. So that means we had 143 years of Gallaudet's history before we finally had the mention of bilingual education, ASL and English, mentioned in our mission. And I'm very proud to say, Middle States took a look at what we came up with and congratulated us. They believe that this mission truly defined who we are, because when you read the mission, you can understand what Gallaudet is and who we are. So we were very excited to see the success of our work, but that's when we began to hit some issues. My own personal experience in my department is where we set up the GSR 101, and that was the first time that all freshmen were required to take American Sign Language as a class. Students got here completely upset because they'd grown up using sign language, American Sign Language all their life, and saw no purpose or reason for it. And I said, you know, even if you grew up using English, you still have to take English if you're a hearing person, and so the same holds true for deaf people using ASL. We saw a distinct attitudinal change. You know, the first people who were a little bit radical and resistant to the whole idea and complained a lot about it, one of them ended up getting a BA degree in American Sign Language, and the second one a master's degree as well in American Sign Language. So that just shows the transformation this had on people. So we took 1 month to develop the curriculum, 1 single month. Back then we didn't have the funding and the support, and only 5 teachers came together to teach this class. 2 of those 5 teachers are here, Janice Cole and Arlene Kelly. So they worked together doing the best they could to bring in different speakers to teach those first ASL classes. And then we developed from there the curriculum, and it is now what it is today, more of ASL composition. So we did this work to develop new ASL placement tests as well. Again, we only had 4 weeks of time to do this, so that everyone who came to Gallaudet might not be fluent in American Sign Language, and so we needed to screen them out to decide whether or not they should be in GSR 103, or which class they needed to be in, and how we could best support our new students. Gallaudet being bilingual meant that we did not reject new signers. We definitely wanted to support them and encourage them here to become students at Gallaudet, providing them the support that they needed to become bilingual at graduation. So we provided them with a number of different kinds of supports. We also then had to develop rubrics to go along with these placement tests and the ASL composition. So we had lots of ideas we had to use to develop these from scratch. Many departments gave us the English rubrics, and so we were able to use those from the English department, and some of them were able to be translated into ASL rubrics and goals. Others we had to come up with. So having all of these things in place, we then went on to establish the Office of Bilingual Teaching and Learning. And we began first with Dirksen as the chair. As time went on, we went on to establish a bilingual approach seminar, which was a wonderful place where we trained faculty how they could infuse bilingualism into the classroom in an intentional way. Lots of training was provided, but after a few years, unfortunately to say, funding was cut for these programs. I think it was probably only one of the few times where faculty could come together and respect one another as colleagues, and it was very unfortunate that we had to lose this seminar. And so we had to then figure out what it is we needed to do to move forward from that point. And we left faculty to their own devices to figure that out. Gallaudet has always been bilingual, but we've never been intentional about our bilingualism. Since our founding in 1864, we always thought about the notion of using sign. EMG was very clear about the importance of signing, as he called it. Knowing we would always have English classes, and yet we always signed and were very much supportive of that visual language. Of course, there was a disruption in the 1880s, but nonetheless, we persisted with the use of sign language despite that oppression. In 1913, even though Gallaudet was continued to work, the NAD brought people in from Gallaudet who were able to sign stories. Veditz was one of those important individuals who talked about the preservation of sign language back in 1913, recognizing the importance of retaining this language and flourishing so that American Sign Language can flourish. In 1960, we see the first book come on the scene of the structure of ASL. It was published at that same time. Gallaudet began hiring deaf students, or bringing in deaf students into the graduate program. That was in 1960, 60 years later. In 1964, we saw the first dictionary of ASL published. We know there were 3 individuals that were seminal in that, Harlan Lane, Bill Stokey, and the linguistics research done in 1971 came together to produce this material. Of course, English also had been prevalent, but we came to understand that there was a sign language equivalent in every different language. There was a lot of confusion about a sign language, and on the scene came Sign Me Alice, which kind of added to the notion that there was a lot of confusion within our community. We went on to talk about communication as opposed to ASL, and then DBN happened, as Lorene said. That was a pivotal point in our history and our world. Deaf people came together, and we'd often would talk about education and sign language. In Deaf Way, that was a prominent theme. We had the Middle States issue, and then along comes President Bobby, who declares this university a bilingual university, and in 2017 established a task force. And again, on this slide's just highlighting some of the very powerful events that have transpired to lead us to where we are. In the absence of a framework, there are a lot of assumptions about what we think ASL is about, what we think being bilingual is about. We often think because someone is signing in the classroom that the classroom is bilingual, but that's insufficient. How do we measure the student's signing ability from freshmen in GSR 101? You know, that is the only class where we evaluate a student's ASL proficiency. It's the only class in GSR 103. The rest rely on English to determine a person's competency of the subject matter. So we've talked about, you know, SimCom and signing at the same time. There's been a lot of misconceptions about that. Some people think that's bilingualism. Laureen says oftentimes this comes down to language fear, and the resistance to American Sign Language is that fear, and it's based on the fact that people assume American Sign Language is a pejorative language, that it's not a language of intellectual discussion and discourse. It's important through all of this that we look within ourselves to determine how we can better understand what it means to have pride in Gallaudet being a bilingual institution. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Lewis and Kristen Mulrooney, who will talk about the Bilingual Task Force as they were co-chairs.
All right, let's get started.
Yep. I just did a real simple fist pump.
I'm excited.
I remember the day we met.
I do.
I actually remember this. I think it was Provost Erding called me in to her office, and we sat down, and she was suggesting that I co-chair this task force. And I said, you know, I'm in mental health, I'm a psychologist, I'm not a linguist. And she said, that's okay, just come with me. And she said, you're going to be co-chairing with Kristen Mulrooney. And I said, I don't even know who that is. And as we came out of the office, she was sitting right there. But yeah, I didn't say anything because she had asked her. And after the two of them talked, we reached out to one another, and the rest is history. So it's been a wonderful working experience as a deaf person, her being hearing. I'm in mental health and counseling, and she's a linguist and the Center for Bilingual Teaching and Learning director in the Academic Affairs Office, and that's one place, you know, where we saw a bilingual area at Gallaudet. But this is where we have it, and it's been wonderful. And let me tell you about 2016, when the president joined Gallaudet. And as she mentioned, there was a decision to put forth a task force. And I'll explain to you a little bit about what the task force entailed. This was a charge. And I'll let you read. Now, when the two of us read this charge, it was a lot. And we focused on three important areas. Now, our charge was to identify the assumptions, the concepts, and the values that will impact others. We're not going to be developing any policy. We developed an understanding of what the assumption, concepts, and values were, and that was our charge. And we have been working on this continuously for 2 years, and will continue to do so. And by the way, the two of us actually can finish each other's sentences now, so feel free to do that.
Oh, I will.
So the task force comprises, The executive team actually chose the members of the task force. It was the president and vice presidents that came together and recommended 23 people with different experiences. We had faculty, staff, and students. They come from a variety of backgrounds.
Graduate students, undergraduate students, people from the Clare Center.
Deaf, hearing, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, people of color. So it was a multitude of individuals on this task force. You can see some of them. Some members of the task force are here, and we would like to recognize them by having them stand up.
Go ahead and stand.
Yeah, over here. They're scattered across the room.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. We met most of the time in Fowler Hall, 101A. It was a very nice classroom. The setup was very nice, and there's a lot of sweat, tears, and blood there. The first step was to get to know one another. We had to be able to build a sense of understanding of one another, of who we were, our identity, the culture we come from, the intersectionalities of this committee. As Lorraine mentioned, there's a lot of multiculturalism that's very important, and to recognize the different ways of life and different language everyone uses and different experiences that people had growing up. The framework was very important, and we recognized how important it was, and the first step was to bring in a multicultural consultant to work with us to begin with. And it was a wonderful work that we've done, that we've built more confidence, and there was braving, and we had space to have some of the conversations that were very, very difficult. But I'm pleased to say that we worked through all of those difficult situations and developed a wonderful, open, and a space where we could all vote together.
In addition, some people would mention that, it took this task force a long time to arrive to where we are today. But remember, each decision that we addressed, we discussed at length. We would look at how we behave at the university and ask ourselves why we behave this way. And so we wanted to be intentional about all of that and to discover the intentionality behind that. And there's power behind, all of these powerful experiences. When we come together to have a discussion in American Sign Language, what typically happens is notes are recorded then in English. However, the discussion is robust in American Sign Language, and transferring that discussion into English may not capture the robustness of that discussion. Even if interpreters are interpreting a discussion that is rendered in American Sign Language, it is then recorded into English. And the English is not a one-to-one translation of the ASL. And so in order to preserve the actual meeting, we needed to talk about how we could do this. If somebody misses the meeting and they actually read it in English, they don't have the same experience that was happening in that meeting in real time. And so we came together to make a decision about how we would record this meeting in a bilingual manner, and we came upon videotaping the meeting. And so we filmed all of our meetings, and we also are filming our presentation today to make sure to preserve the integrity of the conversation that's happening in American Sign Language. And that does cause some tension because there's a cost to videotaping. And we collaborated with people from video services to help them understand the importance of the preservation of the conversation that happens in American Sign Language. Now, of course, it was a 1-minute conversation. They agreed immediately, and video services came back, videotaped and edited it to have a clean version. And then we had our meetings documented in both American Sign Language and English. Now, of course, that led us to another issue. Now recall, we are talking about very deep and sensitive issues that underlie all of what we do. And so some comments could be interpreted as negative at times. And if I am videotaped, then you will see me, the source of that comment, making the comment. Whereas if the English is recorded on paper, you do not actually see the source of the comment. So are we all brave enough to be videotaped? Some days yes, some days no. And so what do we do with this situation? So we tackled this issue and came up with a solution. We requested a certified deaf interpreter to come to our meetings, and if one person wanted to make a very sensitive comment where they didn't want to be identified as the source, we would then videotape the certified deaf interpreter interpreting that comment into American Sign Language, and they would be videotaped. And so we were able to record all the comments through video, and it was extremely successful. Now, I'm explaining all of this to you all because I want you to get a sense of what occurred. We called 23 different individuals together to share their multitude of experiences, to come together to create a bilingual community. And we had the ability to do that, and that we did. So this group of people came together to come up with what we'll show you next.
After we did the multicultural work and we got to know one another and we established a safe, brave space, we started to address some tasks. We had to collect some data and piles of information. Printed information, books, journals, videos, newspapers, and you're gonna see some of that information provided to you later. And we also broke up into small groups to look at all the artifacts, and it was amazing. A lot of people here at Gallaudet did some really, really amazing work. And in looking at all of this, we saw that students and faculty, staff have all raised the question at one point, but no one saw the fruition of those requests. And so we thought, why? And there were a variety of reasons why. The bridge was not there. There was no bridge available. And when we actually implemented this task force, MJ, hello. Yeah, I'm talking about you. So when we set up this task force, MJ and Lorene said, you know, I asked them to come on the task force. They said no, no thank you, because they have been involved in this for so long and they didn't want to waste their time. I begged them, we begged them. Now, the fear was that if they joined, they would just feel the same frustration they did in the past that they couldn't actually do. So myself and Kristen and the provost approached them and asked them if they could please support the process. And they finally said yes, and they never felt that in the past. They finally wanted to really give to this group. And we are still on that journey as of today. And what we're sharing with you today is a work in progress. We are not finished. We're far from being finished. Lorene mentioned 30 years of work, and I understand how long it's going to take. And President Cordano charged us with a year's work of work. And I was uncertain, as well as Kristen, and other people had said, no way this was going to happen in 1 year. Lorene has been doing this for 20 years. So as we started our work, we realized we could not do it in a year, and went back to the president and just said, we can't do it in a year. My role had shifted, and I've decided to become an advocate for the work, and said we need another year, and it wasn't even going to take 2 years. we're a behemoth and we're a huge university, and it really takes a long, long time to address all of the underlying pinnings that we spoke about earlier. So this helped us have a better understanding of the journey we were going to need to take.
We came across a lot of information. We reviewed a plethora of information all the way from 1864 to the present. There were historical reasons behind the establishment of the university, of course, and many proposals on how to improve communication for our students and access for our students across the years. There were a multitude of committees that were established to recommend ideas all throughout the years. And their ideas were brilliant. Many people here today contributed to the resources that we were able to review, so thank you. Now, there were themes that emerged time and again, and the task force members would look back at who prepared this information. This plethora of information that was available to us actually was the foundation of building the bridge that we are now building together. And what you see today is not new information. It is not newly created ideas. How we are expressing it is new, but the content is not. Each individual here in this room already knows this information intuitively. You've worked here, you've experienced the university, you've studied here. This is yours and our experience. So what you see here up on the screen are the themes that emerged. And these themes were all interconnected and connect our community together. They unify our experiences, our working and teaching here at the university, supporting one another, interdepending on one another. It all depends on these themes. And when you think about why you personally decided to come to Gallaudet, whether you came as a student or applied to work here, and why you stayed here, our whys and why we all are here are up on the screen. We value one another. We value direct access, direct communication, one-on-one connection with one another. These here listed are our values. And not for 1 minute can we forego any of these themes.
As a professor, and I mentioned this earlier, I arrived to Gallaudet, I had one road to take, just one. So I decided how I was going to communicate in my classroom. Everyone else made decisions for themselves, and today,
Today we are at a fork in the road. We have two choices, and the task force came face to face and head on with this fork in the road. We had very honest and open conversations. We allowed the tension to be present in the room. The executive team chose an amazing group of people. This is transformative. It was a learning experience that was so beneficial for all of us, but it was not easy. How many boxes of tissues and Kleenex did we go through? I'm telling you, this was a critical process. And when we hit this fork in the road, We looked to see that one path would be to continue the way we have been operating and continue the way we know and are familiar with. The other fork in the road is a new approach, and that is to try to really integrate all the multiculturalism, bilingualism, all of the values that we hold dear, and infuse those with our path ahead. And that path is not clear to us, but it's inspiring. There's more potential there. It's a bright, bright future. And it will require everyone to be involved, to weed whack our way through, to create this new path together. And it is possible. We've already experienced and seen what this other path gives us. And we have now experienced the new path. And everyone on campus will come to this fork in the road and need to choose which way they would like to go. And we are, as did everyone on that committee, and we are requesting that you all be brave and join our path ahead and forge forward together, because we know it is possible. And we will show you this framework. We're almost there. We needed to build up to this moment for you so you understand how we got here. So there are 3 things to keep in mind. This framework really articulates and expresses our assumptions, concepts, and unifying values. We are really just reflecting the experience that we see here at the university. Secondly, the framework provides guidance for how to intentionally support our bilingual community. Now, this is not a policy. This framework will inform and support policies so that people at the university can create those policies to support bilingualism at the university. So it is sustainable. But remember, this framework is not a policy in and of itself. It is a framework that is expressing our values, your values.
Which we really worked hard on to present. We first collected all the data and then we presented. And I'd like the next presenter share how we developed a way of expressing those 3 concepts. And let me introduce Carrie. Hello, everyone. I'm Carrie Ballard. I'm a senior here at Gallaudet. I'm a student, yes. I am honored to be part of the work that's been done over the last 2 years, and I want to thank the task force team for giving me the journey and the opportunity. I've grown quite a bit. When I arrived here to Gallaudet, I think I grew the most by participating in this task force, so thank you so much. Okay, I know we're running out of time. I'm going to try and make this short and get to the point. I'm going to give you some context of the video first so you're familiar with what we're looking at. So we started using American Sign Language, and we've had these discussions through American Sign Language, of course, and thought, okay, let's go ahead and document this. We're going to document it in English, we wrote the framework in English, but in looking at that, we realized that there was some misunderstanding, and it wasn't all that clear. So we decided to do it again from English into ASL. So it was more clear in our primary language, of course. So I'm going to show you the framework. This is a completely new concept because the context is in American Sign Language. All along, year after year, the content has always been in English. We're now going to see it in American Sign Language. I want to thank Phenoma for making this work happen. Oh, Andy Tao, who actually videotaped us. Jane Jonas from Ike's studio. Thank you for everyone who participated. We did this in about 2 months. We rushed right through it to produce this framework video. let's please recognize this is a work in progress. This is not done. Also, I want to recognize that this is not a full representation of our community because we didn't have a lot of time to work on it. But again, it is a work in progress. So with that, is everyone ready to see the framework? Oh, it's going to be in American Sign Language, and it's also captioned. All right, we are ready. It's quite moving, actually. It's a labor of love.
Truly.
It's very, very touching, actually. The members of the task force created this video, and it was a wonderful experience. It was a very emotional experience in coming together with ASL. There was no English script. Everything was done in American Sign Language, including when we videotaped President Cordano. We offered her the gloss, and she declined it. We sent her an ASL video script. One of us filmed someone signing it. She watched it, practiced, and then we filmed her. And then we put it on the teleprompter, the iPad, and she could see herself. And everything was done in ASL. It's very natural, it's very beautiful, and it's a natural expression. We did a couple of ASL glosses for a couple of individuals that preferred that. We're still working on these. We do have some thoughts and recommendations for the board, as well as Gallaudet. Right now, there's no infrastructure for the whole campus. The Clare Center has an infrastructure. Academic Affairs has a small infrastructure in place, but that's it. The infrastructure is missing. Just like she mentioned the two paths. If there's no infrastructure, there's no other path to this. My experience as a teacher, we have to give opportunity and we have to create paths. We have some wonderful leadership in the President's office, and we're recommending establishing an infrastructure from within the President's office to expand and develop for the whole campus community an infrastructure for ASL and bilingualism. It's important for the board members to understand the work and the collaboration that's been done and all of the entrenchment of this on campus. So the bilingual committee and the President's office to the board would like to collaborate, and we're also collaborating with EDI, and over the last week have worked together for tomorrow's presentation and for here on out. You'll see the importance of this. The task force will dissolve, and EDI, with that partnership, will continue the work of bilingualism, and that infrastructure that we're proposing should work hand in hand with the EDI office.
Now, as I mentioned, we filmed our meetings. This was a very creative approach to recording the meetings. And so my request to you is to continue thinking creatively like that, so that we can actually build on what we've created, and so our community can become an intentional bilingual community. So that is our request. Without that foundation and framework, we cannot continue.
So first, I have to say I'm touched. I can see the passion that went into the work of the task force. It's quite impressive. You know, I came to Gallaudet, I guess when I was 91, and I never took a GSR class. Maybe MJ, can I still take it? Is it still available for me? Never too late, right?
ASL 103, GSR 103.
I know I still have a lot to learn, so I want to thank you all for your hard work on behalf of the board. As you've said, Jeff, I know there's some tension and some sensitive conversations to be had, and I want to create the right space for the board to ask some of those tough questions and have a meaningful dialogue. So if it's okay, we move to a closed session with just the task force present.
I hope that's okay with the community.